Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a wall generic ship 03 and I'm going to add it to this map. And you see when I add it here how it disappears underneath the floor? This is always going to be a problem with these custom interior maps. This is one way to solve it. You take the X value and you add it to the floor's name to remind you where it's supposed to be located, and then you change the X value to 500. And that'll put it over here off the side of the map so it's out of your way. And when you want to put it back, you just copy the value from the name there back into the X value and it'll put it right back where it was. So now I'm going to adjust this wall piece to 1199.76 because this is going to be a map at 1200 elevation. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this piece and then I'm going to add 9.2 to the value. So it was at 250 and now it's going to be at 259.2. Next one will be at 268.4 and then the next one will be 277.6 and so on. You just keep adding 9.2 until you finish this side of the corridor. Now once you finish the corridor, you need to go back and you need to add 0.001 to the opposite axis. In this case that will be the Z value. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back and I'm going to select the second wall piece and I'm going to add 0.001 to the Z value. And I'm going to go down 2 pieces and I'm going to do the same thing again. And I just keep going down 2 pieces and adding 0.001. And that'll make sure that there's no texture fighting between the pieces. At some point, your corridor will probably be long enough and you want to place a corner piece. On the screen here, you can see a picture of 2 wall generic ship 03s forming a corner. To make a corner, instead of adding 9.2 to one of the axes, you add or subtract 4.52 to both of the axes and rotate one of the pieces 90 degrees. That'll create the smoothest possible corner between 2 wall generic ship 03s. Another possibility is to use 4.6 at the corner. This creates a little bit more of a jagged corner between the wall pieces, but it does have the advantage of being exactly half of 9.2. Because 4.52 isn't exactly half of 9.2, sometimes you can end up with a situation where walls don't end up lining up exactly across an entire deck. It's not usually a problem, but you have to be careful. So it's a trade-off whether you use 4.52 or 4.6. I'm counting on most of the viewers of this being experienced Foundry authors, but if you're confused about what plus or minus 4.52 means, it just depends on where your corner is and which way your corner is turning. For example, sometimes you might have a corner that would increase both X and Z by 4.52. Sometimes you might increase X by 4.52 and decrease Z by 4.52. It just depends on where your corner is. But the thing is, it should be pretty obvious in the editor if you've got it right. You'll be able to see the 2 pieces fused together. And so I think you'll be able to figure this out. Down at the bottom of the screen, you'll see I also put in the values for a 45-degree angle. I don't suppose people use 45-degree angles all that much, but that's what you need to know if you want to make one. Now if you're curious how I came up with these values, the truth is it was just tedious trial and error, loading in the preview and checking how they lined up, and going back and making a small adjustment and doing it again. So just be happy that I figured it out for you, so you don't have to do it yourself. Okay, so let's go back to that custom interior map I was working on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select this last piece in the corridor, and I'm going to duplicate it, but this time instead of adding 9.2 to the X value, I'm only going to add 4.52. And I'm going to rotate the piece 90 degrees, and I'm going to add 4.52 to the Z value as well, and that'll get me the smoothest possible corner at the end of this corridor. I'm going to speed things up here a little bit and put this in double speed so we can save some time. But I'm going to show you a few little tricks you can use when making these decks. So you see right here I'm making another corridor. I'm adding 9.2 to the Z value to bring these up. Going up is a little bit more of a pain in the butt because you have to keep setting the X value back to normal. Now I'm going to put a 0.001 on every other piece here to make it so there's no texture fighting. And now I'm going to select 4 of these pieces and I'm going to duplicate them. And I'm just going to add 9.2 to the X value to bring them all over on the other side of the corridor right now. I'm going to do the same on the bottom here. But with the bottom is a little bit tricky, it offsets it here. So you still subtract 9.2 to the Z to bring it down here, but then I have to reselect them all and select the first piece and set it to 250, which is where the first one is. And I'm going to add another piece right here in the corner. And I'm going to grab another piece on the side. And I'm going to go ahead and remove 9.2 from the z-value, or subtract, I should say, and that'll put it in the corner too. Now, one thing you need to understand about these corners and stuff in the center of the corridor and so on, you don't necessarily want to use 4.52 to determine the center of a corridor. You can just keep it on the 9.2 axis. It can make it easier. But the 4.52, it only matters when you actually can see a corner. At the end of a corridor, when you're going to have the thing covering on both sides, it doesn't matter, and you can just as easily use 4.6 or 9.2 derivative to make sure that it's all centered. And that makes it easier for you keeping track of exactly where walls and such are. It's just to keep all the corridors 9.2 wide instead of having them different sizes depending on whether you use 4.52 or 9.2. So it's a little tricky. You just gotta be consistent and keep track of what you're doing. Now you see I just changed a couple doors. I put in a door and a turbo lift. I put both of those at 1200.99 because that is what you need to do to make them equal to the light strip on the wall generic ship 03. I'm going to throw another turbo lift here down at the end of the corridor, so we got one at each end of the corridor, and then I'll toss in one more door here. Alright, so we got some doors in here, and I'm going to put a couple fake doors here on the right side of the corridor. And the reason I want to do that is just to make it look like there's some other rooms, maybe some crew quarters, maybe a cargo bay, or it could be a science lab, it could be anything. But they're just closed doors. We have no idea what they really are. And it makes it seem like there's a little bit more to your deck than what you actually have to show the player. And I think, that's also pretty realistic too, because when you beam over to a star base or a starship, you won't necessarily have access to every single crew quarters or every single room. So, it's fair enough to have some non-opening doors. And maybe in a future mission I could come back to this map and I could have different doors open because now you have access to them and you can find out what's behind them. So it leaves a little bit of room for expansion in the future as well. Alright, so I'm going to copy these ones here at the bottom again, and I'm going to set them higher. And I'm going to grab that turbo lift there. I'm just going to take the z-value from that, and I'm going to use that to set this here, so I don't have to recalculate what the z-value is. I just copy it from that since it's already lined up with it. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other side, the west side, if you will, or left side of the screen. I'm going to grab that turbo lift and check what it's set to, and then I'm going to use that here to set these guys. Okay. So now I need to change these back to wall generic ship 03s because I already had to change them to fake doors, and I don't want a fake door on that side. And you notice whenever I change between a wall door or one and a wall generic ship 03, I have to rotate it. Which is one nice thing about using wall door 08, you never have to rotate when you switch between it and a wall generic ship 03. Alright, I'm going to put the floor back. See, I'm going to copy that out of the floor's name and put it in the X value and it's back in position again. And I think we're pretty much ready to, we need to make a ceiling. So what you do for a ceiling is you just copy your floor and you change the height of it and you put it in the same location. So, placing a ceiling is pretty easy. I like putting my ceilings low, but you can set them to whatever height you like. For the ceiling, a height of 4.3 above the floor is a low ceiling. And then there's like 1206 or 1208. 1208 is about as high as you can go without being higher than the top of the wall, so that's about your maximum ceiling height. Alright, so let's go ahead and preview this map and see what it looks like. This is how the map looks right now. It's very basic, just a corridor with a turbo lift on both ends and a large room. And you'll see there's some more problems I need to fix, like there's some texture fighting where the wall doors meet the wall generic ship 03 walls. Right now this is a decent start. But in order to make this really look like a starship deck, I'm going to have to do a lot more work with the corridor structure. I'm going to have to add some more rooms and some more fake doorways and possibly a stub hallway or two just to make it more visually interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to show you how this deck looks after a few more minutes worth of work. You can see some of the changes I made here. I've added some more fake doorways. I've added a corridor where that door used to be. I just took the door out and I put a corridor in here. And there's some small rooms in there. And the rest of the deck I just added a few more little rooms and stuff and a stub hallway at the end. Just to make it look a little bit more interesting and a little bit more like an actual starship deck would look. It's still a fairly basic deck with no props or anything in it, but at least we have something to work with. Now normally when I'd make a custom interior deck I'd have a better idea of what I actually wanted to accomplish. In this case I was just kind of throwing together rooms and stuff pretty much at random. when you make your own deck, hopefully you'll have a better idea just in terms of what kind of rooms you want, what general layout you want. Because that'll help you a lot in terms of coming up with a deck structure. If you want, you can even draw a little diagram on a piece of paper showing what sort of layout you want for your deck. And back when I was making my deck 13 for dereliction duty, I had to draw a diagram like this because at the time the Foundry was so slow that it would take literally 20 seconds after each change for the Foundry to actually update. So for example, if I placed a wall piece, it would take 20 seconds. If I rotated it, it would take another 20 seconds. So at that time I really wanted to make sure every single change I made was the right one. I couldn't afford to just mess around in the Foundry. Fortunately now the Foundry is a lot more responsive, and so you can just pretty much make your map inside the Foundry, and with y relative to 0 you can also change it around as necessary. You don't really have any limitations on how far the edge of the clearing you can go to and stuff, so it's a lot easier now. The next thing I'm going to cover is how to use the glass windows. I've talked a little bit about having levels with a view of the star field, but in order to accomplish that you obviously need to have some way of seeing it. Now in some situations, like in a shuttle bay, you can use a force field. But most of the time you're probably best off using two matching props, window glass 01 and window glass 02. These two objects are basically mirror images of each other, so you have to use them together. There are some issues with the windows. For example, they're not exactly flat. At one edge they're sort of bumped inward, which can cause you some problems. But unfortunately for now, they're all we have to work with. On the screen, I have shown you how to fit these windows together. In order for the windows to match, you need to set them to the opposite rotation value of one another. For example, if one is set to 0 degrees, the other would have to be set to 180 degrees, and so on. If you want to connect the windows together along their flat edge, then you place one window at a given set of coordinates, and then set the other window to those coordinates plus 3. So for example, if one window was set to x equals 0, you would set the other one to x equals 3. In that case, the z value for both windows would be the same, except, as usual, you need to offset one of the windows by 0.001 to avoid texture fighting. If you're connecting them along the opposite edge, which you might want to do if you're making a really long string of windows, you add 7.45 to the window on the right. For these examples, I'm using positive values, but obviously depending on the orientation the windows are running, you might have to use negative values instead. Now there is still one little problem with the windows which you might have already noticed. There's this strange little piece that sticks down lower than the rest of the window. That little piece will be out of place in almost every situation, but there's two possible ways you can hide it. First of all, you can simply hide the bottom of the window. The easiest way to do that is to sink it into the floor by lowering the y value by 2. Another possibility is to place a long 50 unit length building block wall at the bottom of the window to serve as sort of a sill, which will also cover up the little nub. The benefit of hiding the bottom of the window is it allows you to make an unbroken string of windows. The only problem is that when you use windows like this, they're a lot shorter than the other walls. So unless you have your ceiling set to the lowest height, you're going to have to find some sort of way to cover up the gap between the window and the ceiling. Your second option is to place a couple of short 10 unit length building block walls at the edge of the window. These are offset by 3.6 compared to the window next to them. The advantage of this is it allows you to use the full height of the windows, but you obviously can't create an unbroken string of windows. Another thing to keep in mind is that the building block walls aren't quite wide enough to cover the entire bumped in area of the window. So if you want to cover that up, you're going to have to use two building block walls on each side, placed back to back, so they're just a little bit thicker.